Welcome everybody. I'm Rigaudeau, the Vice Chair of Ciarb's YMG Global Steering Committee, and I would like to introduce to you our moderator today, who is Baptiste Rigaudeau, an associate at La Live in Geneva. And I'll be very quick as we have loads to cover in our webinar entitled Paris in Arbitration, and I'll pass the word to Baptiste, who will moderate our panel today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anna. So as Anna was saying, my name is Baptiste Rigaudeau, and on behalf of the FCIArb YMG Steering Committee, YMG stands for, as you know, Young Members Group. Welcome. Thanks everyone for coming out. We have more than 300 registered participants. So that's clearly a signal that our topic is a topic of interest. So I'm not going to start by reading out the bios of our panelists. If you're interested in them, and you should, you can find them on the flyer. Suffice it to say, they know a thing or two about building a successful international arbitration career. And very importantly for today, they are parents. Chiann has 3 kids, Caline has 3 kids as well, Godwin has 7 kids, and José has 2. So the interest of our panel is that all our speakers all have diverse personal and professional experiences, and the tips and advice they're going to give today will hopefully be applicable to the largest part of the audience. At least that is the goal. They are different, and they operate out of different geographical zones. Caline is obviously based in the US. Chiann is in Asia, José is in Europe with deep ties with Latin America, and Godwin is in Africa. They also have different professional experiences. They have acted as counsel in large firms, in smaller firms, as independent counsel. They obviously have experience as arbitrators. 2 of them have extensive experience running institutions, and also they have experience working in academia. And so before I start and dive into the questions, I should mention that we will try to respond either during the discussion or at the end of the discussion to questions from the audience. So feel free to use the chat tab to ask those questions. Now, if everybody's ready, we will go to the first section of our discussion and start at the beginning. So let me direct the first question to Caline, if you accept. In one word, how would you describe your work-life balance without any child?
So BC, before children, I would say the one word is unbalanced.
Unbalanced.
Yeah, and the reason, I'll just expand on it for just a second. There was no counterweight. So if I needed to get on a plane and be gone for 3 days, I could do that. If I needed to come in on Saturday and work, I could do that. You're master of your own time in some ways, other than obviously the law firm to whom you give your time, but there's no counterweight pulling the other way, the way that I think children can do. So. Right.
Godwin, in one word, what was your work-life balance without a child, before children? You muted.
I will say similar to Caline, but I wouldn't use the word unbalanced. I will use 2 words: practically, virtually non-existent. Okay. And I mean, as a young lawyer, arbitrator coming up, you wanted to grow in your firm. So it was more about the work life. You could go everywhere you want to and do whatever you wanted to do. So it was actually virtually non-existent.
All right. José, what would you say in one word? Or 2, maybe, given Godwin has
I have to agree with Godwin and Caline. You know, I was devoting all of my time to building my career, and for me that was it. You know, I unfortunately I was leaving little time for my hobbies and other interests, which I had. But I was devoting most of the time to building my career.
Okay. And Chiann, lastly, in 1 or 2 words?
Yes, I think I echo what everyone else has said, but oozed. My work life just oozed into every crevice of my world. So not much time for anything else and just all encompassing.
So staying with you, Chiann, when you were at the start of your professional career, what was your perception of parents, of being a parent in the field of arbitration? Did you tell yourself that's something that is unachievable, that's too difficult, not for me, or the otherwise?
Well, I have to say there weren't that many parents that were women that were senior in my field when I was first beginning. So speaking for the parents that were men, I thought, you know, their lives were quite glamorous. They could have this beautiful career with great profile, travel around the world, and yet also have children. In the greater sphere of parents in dispute resolution, or at the firm, women that I saw were very efficient, but life was clearly hectic and their plates were spinning all the time. Did I think this was achievable? I don't know if I had too much thinking about that, but I did feel like having children was a non-negotiable thing for me, even though I wasn't quite sure what that would look like if I were to progress both paths of children and work. And I thought that at one point working at the firm, there would certainly be a decision to be made.
Okay. And José, what was your view of parents in the field of arbitration when you started your career?
I did see men around me, you know, friends that were at the time, let's say, mid-level or senior associates, or men working in the institution that were young parents. I did see their struggle, and even though I did not understand their struggle, because it's difficult to understand it when you haven't experienced it yourself. I knew that it was not for me at that time. You know, I did want to become a parent at some point, but I knew that it was not the right time for me. I was just not ready for that. But I could see the struggle of being a parent for young people at that time, and I perhaps, you know, that's one of the reasons why I decided not to, or that I knew it was not for me at the time.
Okay. Now, you obviously all had your first child, and maybe a bit of an uneasy question, and sorry, it's directed to Godwin first. For your first child, do you have any regrets, or did you have any afterthoughts about the timing of your first child, having your first child?
Regrets? No. Maybe I would have done it earlier with the benefit of hindsight. You know, I was 30-ish, about the time just hitting 30 when I had my first child. So with the benefit of hindsight, I probably at 26 or 27, if there's any regret at all, that would have been it. All right. So basically, that's just it.
And can I ask why starting earlier? Did you think it was really too easy? You could have done it before?
No, because I love kids, and since I started having kids, it's been fun being with them. And I said to myself, gosh, I could have done this earlier. But again, you know, it takes two to tango. So it's not dependent on me alone. My partner or my wife will have to decide as well. But left to, I guess I will have done it a lot, maybe a few years earlier, and then have all the pleasure and all the joy of getting to growing up with the children and getting to know them better as well.
Okay. Chiann, do you want to take a crack at that question?
Sure. Well, I didn't have children until my mid-30s. And I have to say, this is a tricky question as to whether, you know, I have regrets as to timing. There is no right or wrong timing. And I think that a lot of people get fixated on this question. I don't think that was it was really, I mean, I certainly hadn't met my husband, so until, you know, later in my 20s. And so having a child any earlier than that wasn't really an option for me. And then when I was thinking about having children, it didn't happen quickly. And so, and then I stopped thinking about having children, and then I was pregnant. So, you know, I think it's a really tricky question. And a lot of people really focus on, oh, if I'm just starting off in my career, this is not a good time. Later on, it's better. You know, once the child's here, they're here, you know, it's like, and life changes forevermore whenever that happens. So I would really resist answering kind of any questions as timing.
Right. Okay. And you would advise people against taking too much against that element, taking too much importance in their decision.
I think so. I mean, I appreciate the point and the reasons for thinking about timing, but it always ends up working out. And I have seen
Agreed.
many iterations of it. And so in that regard, I think you just have to embrace it and go with it when you feel like you're ready.
Okay. Caline, I wanted to ask you, because that can be a tricky moment for especially women. When you announced the big news to your firm, did you run into any brick wall or unsavory comments? For example, as a man, I was told, don't you think you're a bit young at 30? So I can't imagine what kind of comments could come to a woman.
So I was actually super fortunate, because when we had our first child, my practice group leader was a woman and was a mom. And there were actually 2 or 3 other women partners in the group who were moms. And so I had a lot of support from them and from the team. I had 2 of my kids there. And then when I changed firms and had our third, I was at a firm where my practice group leader had 4 kids. So actually I was quite fortunate and didn't encounter anything like that.
Okay. José, do you have anything to add on this? Did you run into any?
No, I mean, I was a father on my mid-30s as well. And, you know, it was kind of expected, you know, basically about time for you to have to become a dad, right? But I do play sometimes with the idea. I do wonder, you know, what would have happened if I had children earlier in my life. I always say, you know, I always see young dads and I see how cool they seem to be, and they clearly have more energy. They're cooler dads. But then, of course, I think about it and I say, well, you know, I am definitely more mature, and I can perhaps pass on stuff to my children that I would not have been able to do it before. So I agree with Chiann. There's no right or wrong answer, and certainly no regrets.
So coming back to, thanks, sorry, José. Coming back to Caline, how did you manage your maternity leave, and more importantly, maybe how did you perceive that maternity and your leave then would impact your career?
So, so I've actually spoken about this in the past in another context, but I lost my dad unexpectedly 3 weeks before our first baby was born. And so my maternity leave was spent grieving and trying to figure out how to deal with an infant and all the emotions that come with it. And for me, it was a time of internal turmoil, both, you know, obviously with my family situation, and then figuring out how work fit into it, and whether or not I had it in me to go back to work, and if I had the courage to go back to work. And actually, I had a lot of questions about that. And I was very fortunate, again, because this woman partner, practice group leader that I mentioned earlier, said, you know, why don't you just come back on a reduced schedule and see how you feel about it? And then, you know, go from there. Don't make any life decisions at this point when you're still grieving and you're still sorting out being a first-time mom. And that's what I did. Actually, I came back at a reduced capacity and realized that actually that was a really good balance for me. And I ended up staying part-time for 10 years after that. So.
Okay. Okay. Related to the topic of maternity leave is paternity leave. And one question I wanted to ask to Chiann was, what do you think about longer paternity leave and maybe equivalent actually to maternity leave? Would it not reduce the impact of maternity leave on the careers of women?
Yeah, it's a good question. I have been in, I think, fairly unusual positions every time I've been pregnant. When I was at HKIC, there had never been a married couple, let alone a family or anyone who had started a family when I first was pregnant, and when I got pregnant in my first year at HKIC. And so the idea of maternity leave, let alone paternity leave, didn't exist. And Hong Kong was just not progressive enough to even think about that. But we've come a long way. And certainly that's now a conversation that, despite, you know, fairly conservative legislation in my part of the world, most international law firms have the policy of paternity leave. And I do think it's a helpful thing to have, because it makes dads think more about the focus of having children at that young age, when it's so important for there to be all hands on deck. And so I think it does balance things out a bit.
What do our dads in the on the panel think? Jose, for example.
You know, it's interesting. I thought this was, you know, a good solution, as we've seen in some countries in Scandinavia, for instance, that they have this policy, and I've always thought that this is a good, you know, a good solution to the issue. I've discussed this with colleagues of mine here in the firm who think, who are dads as well, and they think that's not necessarily the solution. So you can see there are different views about this issue. I had 11 days. That's what France gives dads, and I enjoyed those 11 days thoroughly. And I don't know what I would have done or my wife would have done if I have not had those 11 days. I do think that a slightly longer paternity leave would certainly be useful for the father, for the mother, for the baby, for the family, you know, for everyone. So I think there is an advantage of having longer paternity leaves, certainly. As to whether that will eventually have an impact on making sure that both men and women are equally progressing in their career, so that not everything falls on the woman. You know, I tend to believe that the answer is probably somewhere there, but I do appreciate there are different views on this issue.
Okay, you advocate for flexibility then?
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, Godwin, in your opinion, what can firms or institutions do to facilitate the return of working moms or working dads to work?
Well, a lot, and I will just speak from experience, what we've done and internalized here in my firm where we work. First and foremost, what we've done is to ensure that parents get, both male moms and dads, I mean, they get enough time out. So, I mean, for instance, women get as much as between 6 months to a year, or even more. We are very flexible because we understand how difficult it can be for them to come back. And then for men as well, they get up to 30 days off. And what we've also done is to ease the process by which they come back in. So there's a lot of flexibility. You don't come in and resume fully for the hybrid, even before COVID. So there was some sort of hybrid system that allowed them to work and then come in, and then there are early closures as well. So these are some of the things that we've put in place here. And I think that will go a long way to ease that transition and then reduce the burden on young parents or parents generally, especially if you're in an environment like mine where movement is a bit challenging in terms of traffic and all of that. So you want to ensure that in addition to the pressure that comes from work, they don't have an additional burden of commuting between the office, home, and back and forth, and then going for hearings as well. So there's a lot of flexibility about what we do, and many a times we've also gone into the space to have conversations with them to see how we can improve what we're doing. For instance, are there any particular challenges, and then we want to address that on a case-by-case basis as well. For instance, those are a few of the things that we've been able to do to ease their coming in back into the firm after childbirth.
All right. Okay, that's interesting. Again, advocating for as much flexibility as possible.
Yeah.
So now to conclude with that section of our discussion, I did want to ask, starting with Chiann, a question which I was asking myself, so I'm sure people in the audience will as well, is what is the place of your significant other in this whole organization? So certainly when you had your first child, but then nowadays, what is the place of your significant other?
Yeah, I mean, I think it cannot be scored more than the importance of your partner. I find that single parents really are just incredible people who are able to do so much more than I could ever imagine myself doing, because I certainly, I think 1 + 1, 2 parents is exponentially creates much more than what 2 people could actually do. And I think the partnership of that and the communication of that relationship is fundamental in kind of the operations, the home operations and the scheduling operations and the guiding of the kids as they, grow up, and all these things that you don't kind of think about when you're envisioning the idea of children in the first instance. So I find it to be vital to my sanity and to kind of the health of the family.
Can I take it that everyone on the panel agrees with that answer? Yes. Okay. Everyone's nodding. So now let's kick it up a notch and talk about when you ended up being a more established practitioner. You've become either partners in your firms or at your firms. You have become arbitrators on your own very successfully, or you've climbed the ladder at institutions going up into a management position. In other words, you have had more people depend on you, and you choose to have another child. So starting with Caline, maybe. So as a partner at a law firm, you now have your own clients, or you maybe not your own clients, but at least you are really responsible for the clients. Do you think there should be any discussion about work-life balance or parent duties with clients? Do you think that's a topic that should be put on the table?
Well, I think it's very personal to the client, right? I mean, I've had those kinds of conversations with clients who are similarly situated, sort of young parents, and we, bonded over a hearing, and then from that point on had franker discussions than we probably had before. So I think that it really depends. Having said that, I think this whole pandemic has opened up so much intimacy between us outside counsel and clients. I'd be interested to hear what the others have experienced. And I think that holds true whether or not they're parents. because all of a sudden you're inviting them into your home. They're seeing, your kids Zoom bomb and your dog walk by, and same for them. And even so, it's been really hard on everybody to be remote and to be disconnected physically. And so I think it's just opened up a whole nother set of conversations with clients that I certainly wasn't having in 2018, for example.
Right.
I don't know if others felt the same way, but.
José, do you agree with that experience?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that experience. I wanted to put another idea on the table, which is, and this is something that I've seen different approaches in certain parts of the world. There are cases that I do that are, let's say, Latin American centric. Some are US centric. Some are Europe centric. And I've seen a different approach when discussing procedural timetables, for instance. One aspect of procedural timetables that I see more and more coming back in certain parts of the world is we need to make sure that the team has proper holidays during the times of holidays. So we are negotiating, making sure that, for instance, in August, which is the key month in Europe, at least, or in France, we're trying to negotiate sort of a break, or for the end of the year in Latin America is very important. Those that celebrate Christmas or New Year's, make sure that if there are deadlines that are falling on those dates, that everyone understands, the arbitrators, the clients, opposing counsel, that everyone understands that it is okay to put a 2-week break on the calendar, and that will not affect anyone. Yeah, I've been on the receiving end of not very recently. We requested an extension. The tribunal gave us until the 30th of December for a very difficult filing, and it was not appreciated. I did not appreciate it. The client did not appreciate it. And honestly, I don't think it was appropriate. I mean, everyone is, if there is a holiday in the world that is universal, is New Year's, right? That really affected everyone's life with family on that period. And I think we should. I see colleagues from certain parts of the world that when a date like that is proposed, they don't say anything, because there is this idea that you cannot tell your client that you would prefer to have a few days off, whereas in some parts of the world that's okay. That is a good conversation to have with your client, because, to be honest, even the client will appreciate it.
Right.
And I think that's certainly a conversation that needs to be had with the client, this work-life balance, even though I appreciate it's not the same in different parts of the world.
Yeah. Slightly different angle, and because time is running fast, as we all know, slightly different angle. You act as arbitrator, and that question is going to first be directed to Chiann. Has it ever occurred that you had parental problems or personal problems that needed to be dealt with while acting as arbitrator, and that you had to share them with the parties a bit more, maybe, that you would have wanted to?
I wish I had a more liberal response to this. I have been probably not a very good example on this particular point as an arbitrator. And my anecdote, as some of you might know, is such that I learned quite late in the game that I was pregnant last year. And this was during COVID, and hearings were taking place. And because I'm an independent arbitrator and really can't delegate, I thought it was important for me to keep that quiet for as long as I could. And so I did, and ended up actually not really sharing with many people. And only now, 9 months later, kind of being much more open about having had this now 9-month-old. In fact, I was in the hospital giving presentations, and I was working right through. And part of it was because I felt that what I do is a service to the parties, and really it would be quite disruptive for me to have impacted the procedural timetables of my existing arbitrations. I also have the feeling that, the concern that, if people find out that I'm pregnant, then, people will think that I won't have the capacity to deal with appointments. And so it's been a learning experience for myself. I'm still kind of evolving and kind of learning on my own as to what that means for me and how I want to balance my life. And, we do have, as independent arbitrators, we do have kind of the flexibility to say yes and no, but at the same time, as we know, reputation is almost everything that we have and the only thing we have in the market. And so I had a very intensive first 6 months where I was writing awards, I was taking an exam that I hadn't finished. And so everything was happening all within those first 6 months. But now I can live to tell the story. And frankly, I think COVID has helped a lot in allowing me to kind of engage in a way that, allows me to do most of my work at, near the, in town, at home. Of course, that is changing quickly, as we know, as travel is back out with a vengeance, as I think most of you are experiencing. So I'm not really a good person for that comment. And I'm not really, I wouldn't say do what I did, but that's how I did it.
So I guess the natural follow-up question is, would you have done anything different? Or would you advise to do anything different?
Well, I probably would have done things different had I had more time to plan it out. I found out halfway through my pregnancy that I was pregnant. And so I just had to go. And I just had to go with it and own it. And I did. And, it worked out. I had a couple of hearings. I wrote a couple of awards. I didn't sleep much, but I just was on autopilot and I just did it. Would I have done it differently? I think, you can say no to appointments if you're, and certainly that was something that I could do without having to explain exactly why I was saying no. But no, would I have done it differently? No, not for myself. I'm not wired like that.
Right.
But for other people, I think you have to know yourself and know your kind of your parameters for life and choose with confidence that it'll be okay.
Well done. Anyway, so let's go to, we touched upon it a little bit when you were answering one of the questions, Caline, and that's the impact of home office and work arrangements during the pandemic. And a question I wanted to ask you, maybe then I'll direct it directly to Caline, is how do you think it changed your role as a parent? I know for myself that it was a good opportunity to carve out family time during the day because I no longer had any commute. And it was also a good time, I guess, a forced time to rethink how to share the parenting responsibilities between the two parents. What was the impact of that whole ordeal on you, Caline?
I think it was a bit of a wake-up call, to be honest, because it completely shifted where I spent my time. Like you said, there's the commute, but there's also all the travel for work, for conferences, for meetings, etc. All that time spent away. which I always would minimize. So I would take the last flight out, the first flight in, and of course it's taxing on me because I'm not sleeping and I'm, going to Europe for 2 days and coming back. So all of a sudden, all this tiredness from trips and all that time away that was kind of non-negotiable time away was now time gained back to be together, to have 3 meals a day together, which was a big change. I mean, typically I get home after the kids have already had dinner. And so that was really amazing. I know it was a very difficult time for a lot of people who were, impacted and health-wise and otherwise. But sort of the silver lining for me was sort of a reminder of, hey, this is time spent together, invested together. And especially my kids were sort of pre-teen, early teen in that 2-year period. And so actually being around just to overhear conversations, not even to engage all the time, but I'd go up, get a cup of coffee, come back to my basement, and I'd overhear something, and then I could seize on it and have a spontaneous conversation, for 5 minutes in ways that you do at the office with your colleagues. But all of a sudden I was doing it with my kids. And that was just a real privilege. And I think part of coming back now is a bit daunting to this, traveling, coming back with the fury, as Chiann mentioned, because the opportunity cost of that is obviously those moments together.
Right. So now I'm going to ask a question as a spokesperson for the non-partners in the audience. And that's related to that is, have those pandemic / COVID work arrangements during the pandemic, have they changed your views towards your associates that are also parents, and about the flexibility that they too need? José, maybe.
Yes, I think it has changed, generally speaking, the relationship with partners, associates, for good. I can say that I have one associate. It's one of the associates that I work the most. She just changed zip codes. She went to live at another city. Of course, whenever she needs to come to Paris to the office, she will come, but she just moved, and maybe that would have been a difficult conversation before COVID, but after COVID it was very natural. We were used to working remotely anyway. But I have to say that the arbitration department in my firm, we are already used to working remotely. Our teams are composed with lawyers from different places, so it wasn't shocking anyway. But you do expect the people that you work with in your office to have some physical presence. I think the physical presence was the need for physical presence was stronger before COVID. Now it's we know they are there, and whenever we need to meet, we will meet. But there is no longer this issue of you checking out who's in the office at what time. No one really cares anymore, and I think that's good for everyone. So I think this was a big change for everyone, and I think it's a change that will stay moving forward. And of course, that has an impact in the life of everyone's families. Being able to spend the morning or 1 day or 2 days a week working from home and doing other stuff. It just makes people's lives easier, and I think everyone has a stronger understanding of the needs of family life now, thanks to the pandemic.
Expect to receive a lot of applications, José, with that answer. Godwin, you were nodding. You agree with what José was saying?
Absolutely, I agree. I couldn't disagree with that. And especially what we saw during the pandemic, was the fact that our lawyers, arbitrators, we are more productive. They were more productive because they had time at home to work with their families, and then they were able to put in more hours while working from home, right? So I think one positive thing that the pandemic has done is completely alter the world of work. And like José said, it's not going to be the same, and it's for good, because we see that now you don't need people to be in the office for them to be productive, for them to be able to deliver. And we saw from the statistics when we did the numbers and we did the studies, we said that, I mean, it was really beneficial. And so I don't see us going back to the old way of doing things, right? So I completely agree with José. It's the way to go forward, and I think that's what I would be recommending for any young and upcoming arbitrator. Retain that flexibility. It's very, very important.
Okay, I'm not going to ask if there are any dissenting opinions on the panel. So now it's the time for our audience to really take out their notepads and start writing down some tips and advice. If you weren't doing it already, I was doing it myself. And I'll start with Chiann, with a sort of concluding question, and it is, how would you say parenthood has impacted your career?
So
I'll let you choose the angle from which you'll answer that.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a participant of the international arbitration community, parenthood has enriched my life as a citizen of the community. I think certainly during COVID, we all gathered as parents and hunkered down, and we're able to relate on a human level that I think, looking back, was invaluable in creating more enriching relationships, and ones that I think will carry through our careers. And so I think having that as a common theme with, I would say, most arbitration practitioners, I think that certainly humanizes all of us. And I think it really enriches the work that we do and gives us better empathy with families and professionals.
Same question to Godwin. There must exist a parallel universe where there is a Godwin without children. Is he a better practitioner than you in this universe?
Well, I'll say it's been positives, because that ability to interact with the children, to hear their worldview, to understand, hear divergent views. I mean, we deal with this every day, but the ability to be more tolerant of people's dissenting views. I mean, you deal with your children every day. You see how different they are, how they have different views on issues. So that have an impact as an arbitrator on you as well. You tend to appreciate people's viewpoint a lot better. You tend to understand where they're coming from, and then it gives you a focus on the best side of what people are thinking, what they're doing. And like Chiann said, you're able to, for those who are going through challenges, you're able to empathize with them as well. So parenthood really has a positive influence on me. I tend to be a little bit hasty, but with the children, I learn to be more tolerant, more patient. And I think that have also adherence influenced how I relate with lawyers, colleagues, and people generally.
Right. I should mention to the audience that the goal of the webinar is not to convince you to have children, but you heard them. You heard them. So now, next to last question, I'm going to ask each panelist to give us two of their best tips on how to juggle parent practitioner life, and answer the question which was the basis for this webinar. How do I make sure I attend soccer or judo practice and I am a real reliable team member in my international arbitration practice? Starting with Caline.
That's a big question. So two things. I think they're related, two sides of the same coin. And the first one might be a bit counterintuitive, but I would say the first thing is step up when there are difficult situations, when your team needs you, roll up your sleeves, get the work done, get those binders checked before they go out, whatever you need to do to get that filing done, whatever you need to do to get that hearing done, because I think that earns your colleagues' trust, and it builds a team. It's the right thing to do. It's good for you, for your career. It's good for the team building. It shows that you're committed, and you're earning your reputation as, you know, someone reliable, who's present, who's not afraid to work hard. And that leads to the second point, because in order for you to be able to go to those events, you kind of have to have street cred. And part of that is making sure that you're in and rolling up your sleeves and doing the work that you need to do when the going gets tough. And I think this is how you build your credibility vis-a-vis your team. And it helps you then set boundaries and to say, okay, here in this situation, this is really important to me and I need to step out, and I can't miss XYZ thing with my kids. And you have you've invested, right? It's like a bank account. You've invested into it, and then you're doing a withdrawal every once in a while when you need to, and setting boundaries. And that leads to the second point. It's all interrelated. I don't know if it's 1 point or 2 points, but is to be judicious, because I don't think all events are not created equal, and not everything is equally important. And so I think part of being a team member and earning that flexibility and that ability to, you know, put your foot down when you need to, is also being thoughtful about when you choose to do it, and sort of choosing your moment wisely. So that would be my 2 tips, or 1.5 tips.
So choose to attend the competition rather than all the trainings.
For example.
Right. José, 2 of your best tips.
Yeah, it's that's a difficult question, but I would start, and this is related to the tips that we heard from Caline. I think organization is the key. I think one of the benefits of being a parent in this profession, or any profession, is that it helps you to be efficient and better organized person, generally speaking. You know, we started saying that before we had children, you know, it was work all the time, anytime, and you know, when work is there all the time, anytime, then you don't necessarily have the need to organize. But when you have children, and you know, you need to organize things with time so that everything gets done in the appropriate time. So you'll have shorter coffees, you'll have less time wasted during the day, because you know you need to leave at a certain time. You know, I think that if you organize yourself and you speak openly about your organization with your team, then it's great, because then everyone knows what your organization is. Of course, when you are working, you need to be, as Caline said, fully committed to the team. But it is important that everyone knows what your organization is, so that you don't surprise people, you know, at a certain point, saying you're not there, or you won't be there, or you have an emergency or something. You know, my wife is also an arbitration practitioner, and for us, Outlook is an essential tool in our lives. We need to, you know, all the meetings need to be coordinated. I cannot accept a hearing date if she has a hearing date, or I mean, we could accept it, but we need to make sure that then grandparents are available as well. So, you know, again, organization is the key. Be organized and communicate to your team about your organization, so that your team knows what your needs are, and you know, how you're going to work, and it's not going to be an issue.
Okay.
So that for me is...
Oh, you muted yourself just now. But you were saying organization and communicating with your team, that organization.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And those are and that's really the tip that I can give today.
Okay. Okay, thanks. Chiann, 2 tips for us. Mere mortals.
Yes, no, I certainly think that the points that Caline and José have raised are important. I think the investment point, I think, is a really key point. I think that showing that you are a hard worker across the board with all that you've committed to, because obviously you commit to something, you want to put your best foot forward, allows you to then, when you say you have to push back, have that be a real pushback rather than an easy pushback. So I think that those kind of conversations and just kind of setting the scene for the kind of player you are in whatever forum you're operating in is important.
Thanks so much. Godwin, last but certainly not least.
Yeah, I agree with all that has been said. But I think because of the peculiarities of where I come from and the team that I work in and the way we're structured, right? I will talk about flexibility and negotiation. Flexibility in the sense that we're a lot flexible. So yes, you organize, you prepare ahead, you communicate, but we find ourselves at instances where there are times setting hearings just come, especially if you're also doing some sort of litigation in Nigeria, and then you don't have prior notice of this. So you need to be able to be flexible and negotiate with team members to be able to attend that. It's sort of trade-off with those who are less busy, they're standing for you, and then you. So in my space that have worked brilliantly for me brilliantly for me, and even with my kids as well, I negotiate with them always as well, because there are times, let's be honest, the work is so, the schedule is so tight, and then you're not able to attend that soccer, you're not available to be able, even with the best intention, and then you have to sit with them and try to negotiate and understand and say, okay, I'm going to miss this now, but trust me, next time I'll be there for this other event and all of that sort of trade-off. So I will say some flexibility, retain some flexibility, and then keep the door open for you to be able to negotiate those difficult moments if they do come.
Okay, very good. I hope our audience has written down all these tips verbatim. Before asking the last question, which is the cliffhanger question of the seminar, I'm going to take a question from the Q&A button from our audience. So I'm going to read it out, and it's unfortunate it's from an anonymous attendee. But it says, thank you for this webinar and for being so candid about what it means to become a parent while working in arbitration. What would be your view of someone leaving practice for a couple of years to spend more time with their children and then coming back to the field? Would you consider that to be career breaking, or could that time be considered an asset? And thank you to Caline for mentioning that she worked part-time for 10 years. It is encouraging. So maybe Caline, do you want to take a first crack at this?
That's a hard question. Can I give the lawyer answer? It depends. I'm just kidding.
Of course.
I think ultimately you got to do what matters to you at that moment. And as Chiann said, sometimes, things will have a way of working out. And I think that if you're torn and your heart's not in it, then you're not going to be performing at your best, whether you're at work or you're at home. And so, and it's part of what I was wrestling with when I was coming back from my first maternity leave was, do I have the courage to just get back in and continue building my career? And, I made the decision that I made for various reasons. And I'm glad that I made that I stayed in the game, quote unquote, and kind of worked through it. But I think ultimately your heart has to be in it, because if not, then you're doing yourself a disservice, and you're probably better off. I don't know. I mean, if you take that time off and come back rejuvenated and ready to commit, I think that goes a long way, as opposed to feeling torn between two things and doing neither well. But I don't know what my co-panelists might think.
Jose, what do you think?
I had an experience of a colleague when I was at the ICC, and I was Deputy Secretary General. I was in charge of hiring and supervising the staff. And there was a colleague which I had met when I had arrived at the ICC. I was a deputy counsel, basically a junior lawyer. She left, she had a family, she had 4 kids. And then at some point in her life, she was ready to come back to work. And I did not hesitate to hire her, because she knew everything. You know, it was so easy for me to have her back and have the work perfectly done. So clearly she had spent time with her family, and she was ready to come back, and she was then quickly thereafter we promoted her to a more senior position. And for me, it was a very good experience, and I realized that I think something needs to be done in this profession to encourage parents that leave at some point in their lives because they want to spend more time with their family. There's a lot of talent out there that goes to waste if they don't come back to the profession, and I think we need to be aware of that, and we need to make sure that firms in particular are open to receiving that talent back to the firm. You know, as I said, it was a very interesting experience for me, and one that I certainly don't regret.
Okay, that's very encouraging, and I think we will all echo your call for retaining talent in the profession whenever it's doable. Okay, so we're at the end of our seminar. We have 2 minutes left, so 2 minutes to ask the cliffhanger question, which we already know the answer to, and that is having kids all worth it in the end? Yes, probably.
Absolutely.
We're all nodding, and we all have our personal experience, and even Anna, who also has kids, obviously nods. Any last words from our panelists, Caline, Chiann, José, Godwin? No?
Just thank you for having us and for this important topic. I think it's, sorry, just to intervene, that it's really important to find other parents with whom to talk and to share stories, and some of them are a little bit further ahead from you, and that can be very encouraging, both in terms of their career and in terms of how old their kids are. I'm always looking for advice from parents who are further along, and then, you know, paying it back to those who are new parents. I think it's really important to have this discussion and to be there and supportive of each other. So thank you to you guys for organizing this panel.
Yeah, it was really the goal of the seminar, to share experience and to learn. So then I'll conclude by thanking you all very much, all our speakers. Some of you may not know, but for example, Caline has been up from 7 a.m. to attend this webinar. Chiann, it's probably late for you as well in Singapore. So thank you very much for your commitment. It was a great honor for me to moderate this panel and tackle this difficult but essential topic. Many thanks also to my brilliant colleagues from the organizing committee, Anna, who's on the screen, Cam, Tachi, Juan Carlos, and last but not least, Arun. And loads of thanks to our audience for registering and for your participation. And I should say that you shouldn't forget to check out the CIArb and CIArb YMG social media accounts to see what's next on our agenda. We have a webinar coming up on security for cost in international arbitration. So look out for that webinar, and the dates will be shared soon. And unless Anna has anything to add.
No, thank you. It was very enriching. Thank you.
And I think we're just in the timing. So perfect. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.